One of Jeffrey Epstein's victims just broke her silence, and what she said didn't just send shockwaves through the room. It shook the foundation of Washington itself. For decades, the most powerful people in America have whispered about Epstein, his money, his influence, his secrets. But in one raw, emotional hearing, that silence cracked. And it was Jasmine Crockett, the Texas firebrand known for cutting through political spin, who turned that moment into something far bigger than anyone expected. You could feel the air shift as the survivor spoke. This wasn't just another committee meeting or empty roundtable. It was a reckoning. For the first time, a woman who had lived through the nightmare stood before members of Congress and told her story.
Many of you don't recall, but we were sent home early to try to avoid being able to take a vote on something like getting these files. We are about doing real transparency. We don't care who's in the files. We are going after you. So if I had to sum up what happened today, we heard the stories of victims, and honestly, we heard the story of at least one person that has never come forward before today. This was the very first time that she was telling anyone in a semi-public way her story. And if I had to summarize the theme, I would say that their theme was to do something. It is probably the theme of the American people in general right now when it comes to government, is that they want us to do something. So yes, we had the roundtable, but they actually want to see some action. The fact that this started off in the 90s, and we had someone who could talk about what happened to them in the 90s. But then you go down the line and you've got somebody that's telling us their story from 2008. These failures led to years and years of abuse that did not have to take place. And so the reality is this. Some think that this is all over and some think that nothing else is going on. But if there was ever a RICO case, it would have been the Epstein case. So how we went from something that should have been RICO because of how sophisticated of a system this was, and this wasn't just one little sick old man that was doing stuff, but there were so many layers, whether we're talking about the banks that were involved, whether we're talking about those that worked for him, that helped him, whether we're talking about the monster known as Maxwell, and that's exactly how y'all need to refer to her. She is a monster. She is not a victim. So let me tell you, I want some action items to come out of this because for once we somewhat look like we're bipartisan in the Oversight Committee. Number one, we need answers. We need answers on why it is that Maxwell was transferred from her current station or her former station in Florida down to Texas. We need to have an understanding because everything that I heard today leads me to know that for sure she was all up and in and through this entire process, not to mention that she was indicted by a jury of her peers and then she was tried and convicted and given 20 years. So why is it that we had somebody, again, it almost seems like we are doomed to repeat our failures, because why is it we have high-level people that seemingly are running cover for a criminal? And that is what she is. She is a monster and she is a criminal. So number one, we need answers on what happened with that transfer, why it took place. And honestly, we all need to stand together and say that Maxwell needs to go back to where the monsters go, which is to a higher level of security. We also need to understand that Debbie Wasserman Schultz has legislation that she has been trying to push forward. And so in a bipartisan way, we all need to get behind Debbie, because we found and what we learned is that there were loopholes as it relates to the Crime Victims Act. And so we've got to make sure that no other victims suffer in the way that they did when you have somebody like Alex Acosta that decides that he wants to play games and dismiss a case and never inform the victims of what's going on as is required by law. So we are going to have to fix those loopholes to make sure that that doesn't happen, because it took them 10 years of fighting this, and ultimately by the time they got to the end of it, well, it also was Jeffrey Epstein's end, and so there was not a resolution for that. And the final thing that I think that we need to do is, obviously, we need to continue to push forward and make sure that we get all the files, because we know that we have not received them all. Because I am standing in front of the press, I'm also going to make a plea. One of the things that I realized was that there's a lot of stuff that the DOJ may have, but honestly, if you don't have a thorough investigation, and I can't say if we had a thorough investigation or not, we have no idea. But the reality is that when you have investigators that they go out and they collect information. I am not necessarily convinced that they even have gone out and done their due diligence to fully investigate this case in the first place. So if there's anyone in the public that believes that you have information that would be valuable, you've never been able to get through to federal agencies, or no one would listen to you when you try to go forward and bring information forward. I am asking that you trust oversight DIMS and you bring that information to us. Or if you know where some information is contained, let us know so that we can then send subpoenas out that way. We want to do right not only by those that have already suffered under Epstein, but we want to prevent other trafficking rings that we know are out there. We want to make sure that we are doing right for future generations. So with that, I now have the honor of presenting to you the firecracker out of New Mexico.
Her voice trembled, but her words landed like thunder. Lawmakers who had long danced around the topic suddenly had nowhere to hide. And Jasmine Crockett didn't waste a second. She looked into the cameras and said what millions of Americans have been thinking. This wasn't just one man's crime. This was a system, a structure that protected the powerful and silenced the vulnerable. And that system, she warned, is still working today. It wasn't about left or right. It was about truth. Crockett reminded everyone watching that oversight Democrats had to fight just to hold this hearing. She recalled how Congress was sent home early before, how attempts were made to stop votes that could have forced Epstein's files into the light. "We don't care who's in those files," she said firmly. "We're going after you." That one sentence hit harder than any headline. It was a statement of defiance, of purpose. For years, investigations had been stalled, documents sealed, and victims ignored. But on this day, someone finally said what others were too afraid to admit. Justice doesn't work if it protects the powerful first. But Crockett didn't stop there. She connected the dots others pretended weren't there. She said if there was ever a case that fit RICO, organized criminal conspiracy, it was Epstein's. This wasn't one rich man's twisted hobby. It was a coordinated operation. Banks moved the money. Employees handled logistics. Influential friends looked the other way. Even government institutions, through neglect or corruption, allowed it to go on for years. This wasn't one sick old man, she said. This was a whole machine built to hide him. You could see some members shift uncomfortably in their seats. Because she wasn't just talking about Epstein. She was talking about everyone who made him possible. And then came the part that made Washington squirm. Crockett turned her fire toward the Department of Justice itself. She demanded answers about why Ghislaine Maxwell, the woman convicted for her role in Epstein's trafficking network, had been quietly transferred to a lower security facility in Texas. No public explanation, no transparency, no accountability. Crockett wanted to know who approved it and why. "She is not a victim," Crockett said bluntly. "She is a monster." For once, the room fell silent, not out of respect, but discomfort. Because if what Crockett was suggesting was true, it meant that even after conviction, even after public outrage, the system was still protecting one of its own. Rumors have been swirling for months about how Maxwell's conditions were eased. Some reports even suggest that high-level connections may have influenced her placement. Crockett didn't push conspiracy, she demanded clarity. And that's what made her stand out. While others danced around the issue, she brought it into the daylight and asked the question that no one else would. If Epstein's network reached into financial institutions and law enforcement before, what's stopping it now? That's when the mood in the room changed. This was no longer about history. It was about the present. Then Crockett pivoted to something even more explosive, the law itself. She backed Representative Debbie Wasserman Schultz's bill to close loopholes in the Crime Victims Act, the same loopholes that allowed prosecutors like Alex Acosta to cut secret deals behind victims' backs. Crockett reminded the country that Acosta's decisions weren't ancient history. They were a blueprint for how power avoids punishment. These women were fighting for 10 years, she said. 10 years before anyone listened. And by the time they got to the end, Epstein was gone, and they never got justice. The implication was clear. Without reform, it could happen again. What Crockett made painfully obvious was that the Epstein story was never just about one person. It was about the architecture of power itself. It was about how influence buys silence, how bureaucracies bury evidence, how investigations conveniently stop when the trail leads too high. Every piece of the puzzle, banks, prosecutors, agencies, fit together perfectly to shield the same people the law was supposed to expose. And that's why Crockett's demand for full access to all Epstein-related files hit like a thunderclap. She said Congress still hasn't received everything, and that's unacceptable. If the Department of Justice can hide evidence from Congress, what hope does the public have? But the real turning point came when Crockett made a plea directly to the public. She looked into the cameras and said that if anyone out there had information, anything the government ignored, they should bring it directly to the Oversight Committee. Well, listen, she said. If you couldn't get through before, you can now. It was more than a political statement. It was an open door to a conversation the country's been waiting to have. For the first time, a member of Congress was asking ordinary people to help expose the truth, bypassing the institutions that had failed them. That one line, trust oversight, became a rallying cry. Wasn't just about the Epstein case anymore. Crockett was drawing a line between justice and complacency, between secrecy and democracy. Her point was simple but devastating. If the government can't protect the powerless, then it's not doing its job. This is not about who's in office, she said. This is about who's accountable. And that statement flipped the entire narrative. Because for years, every discussion about Epstein has been about who might be named in those files. Crockett shifted the focus to why those names remain hidden. She wasn't chasing headlines. She was demanding systemic change. As the hearing went on, you could sense how different this moment was. For once, someone wasn't using the story for political leverage or outrage bait. Crockett's tone was protective, even maternal, toward the victims. She called out the excuses, the cover-ups, and the endless cycles of thoughts and prayers that lead nowhere. We can't fix what we won't face, she said. And that's exactly why this moment mattered. It wasn't about rehashing an old scandal. It was about exposing the rot that allowed it to exist in the first place. Because what Crockett said next turned the entire hearing into something far deeper than political theater. She reframed the Epstein scandal as a moral test for the government itself. Can the same institutions that failed these women now hold themselves accountable? She asked. And in that one question, she captured the unease of millions watching at home. Because everyone knows the answer isn't simple. The system that created the problem rarely volunteers to fix it. That's why her push for transparency wasn't symbolic. It was urgent. Every withheld file, every delayed investigation, every sealed record keeps that power structure intact. The deeper she went, the more obvious it became that this wasn't a partisan fight. It was a fight between truth and denial. Between those who believe power should be questioned and those who believe it should be obeyed. When Crockett said, "We don't care who's in those files," she drew a clear line. No one is untouchable. Not CEOs. Not politicians. Not anyone who benefited from silence. It was a rare, raw moment of honesty in a room known for scripted statements and political point scoring. And yet, even as she called for action, Crockett reminded everyone that change doesn't come from hearings alone. People want us to do something, she said. That's why she demanded Congress move beyond speeches and toward accountability. That means investigating Maxwell's transfer. That means unsealing every last file. That means rewriting the laws that let this happen in the first place. Because for all the talk of reform, without pressure, without people watching, the same patterns repeat. History doesn't fix itself. It's forced to change. To be why the end of her remarks, Crockett had done something rare. She had made oversight feel personal. She'd turned policy into a moral question every viewer could feel. This isn't just about the past, she said. It's about the next generation. And in that moment, you could see exactly what she meant. The point wasn't just to expose one man's crimes. It was to ensure no one could ever build a network like his again. That's what accountability really means. The hearing ended, but the conversation didn't. Crockett's words echoed online and across the press. Victims' advocates praised her for breaking the pattern of polite silence. Commentators noted that her call for bipartisan action, especially her support for closing legal loopholes, was something Congress desperately needed. But for Crockett, it wasn't about praise. It was about persistence. Because if there's one thing she made clear, it's that oversight doesn't stop when the cameras turn off. She closed with a message that hit like a challenge. If you believe in real accountability, stay engaged, she said. Keep asking questions. Keep demanding answers. Justice only moves when people push it. It wasn't a soundbite, it was a call to arms. Because in a world where power protects itself, silence is complicity. And Crockett wasn't about to be silent.so. If you're watching this, remember what moments like this mean. They remind us that truth doesn't come from institutions, it comes from pressure, from people who refuse to look away. And if we stop pushing, if we stop asking, that's when the darkness wins. That if you believe in transparency, if you believe in accountability, and if you believe the truth still matters, don't just scroll past. Subscribe, hit the like button, and help keep these stories alive. Because the more people watching, the harder it becomes for anyone to bury the truth.